If you're an independent artist or you're a record label and you've made a record, congratulations, whether it's a single, an EP, or a full length, you kind of need to know, how am I going to price this record? Not only for physical, if you're doing CDs or vinyl or cassettes, but also if you're doing digital. How am I going to price this? Like, how do I know how much to charge to make sure that I make a profit, to make sure that people still want to buy it so that the artist gets paid, all that stuff? That's what we're going to figure out today. We're going to dive into it. We're going to talk about some of the things, like basically the common pricing that I've seen when it comes to digital releases, when it comes to physical, including vinyl, tapes, and CDs. And we're going to talk all about that and some of the philosophies and some of the things to consider. But first, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which ironically has a lot to do with keeping track of money and keeping track of the money that you make. And hopefully when you price a record well, you sell a lot of copies of it. And now you're overwhelmed and you need to make sure that the artists get their percentage. And so there's a company called Infinite Catalog who we've partnered with. And a lot of the people, record labels in our community, use this platform as well. They're really good people. They're humans over there. And they are the best solution for keeping track of your record label's royalties, no matter the size of your record label at all. I mean, you could be super, super small. They have a plan and a system for you. Or you could be super, super huge. And maybe you start super small and then you become super huge. And so go to infinitecatalog.com to check them out. Their software is really incredible. They're great people. And I'm so grateful to them for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to talk about before we dive into the actual pricing. There's three things to consider, okay? Here we go. Number one, you need to consider things, including manufacturing, but consider some costs and expenses that are even outside of manufacturing. So right now we're talking about physical, but this also relates to digital in the sense that a lot of us go, okay, this vinyl record costs me $12 to make individually. And so if I sell it for $20, I make an $8 profit. But we wanted to make sure that we are considering things like the artist's royalty and how much the artist invested in mixing and recording and mastering and even their time in writing the songs. And what about photography or marketing or press? And so when you roll all of those expenses into an album, you might realize actually the cost per unit for this record is about $18. So if we sell it for $20, our profit is only $2. And so we want to think about that. Just make sure you're considering all of your expenses when you're kind of reverse engineering, let's say a nice price of a vinyl record for $25 or a CD for $10, you're kind of reverse engineering, including all of those expenses. The second thing I want to keep in mind is the concept of a loss leader. You remember back when Best Buy used to sell CDs? Towards the end of that, like in the 2008, 2009, 2010 era, before they got rid of them, I think they got rid of them, they would sell CDs for like $9.99. They weren't really making a profit on them. In some cases, they were losing money, but that was called a loss leader because they wanted you to come into the store. They wanted to be your destination to buy a CD in hopes that they also become your destination when you want to buy a computer or a dishwasher, things that have a higher profit margin for them. So this is the concept of a loss leader. And so keep in mind that there actually might be times or different formats that we do where we don't really make a lot of money, but they draw attention to us. And so in some cases, it could be vinyl. Even just selling 75% of the vinyl units you do or 90% of the vinyl units you do will just help you break even on the whole project. Well, that's okay sometimes if it brings more attention to the artist, if you can share about the record on social media, and people are like, wow, this record looks really cool. I should go check it out. Maybe they don't buy the actual vinyl, but them seeing the vinyl draws them to Spotify to check out the album. So that's the concept of a loss leader, where you don't actually make a profit. You may even incur a loss, but it has a different purpose. And finally, different contexts dictate different pricing. And what I mean by that, at a live show, the band's on tour, they might sell a vinyl record for $30 or a t-shirt for $40. But in a record store, where nobody knows who this band is, you might want to entice people to check out the record by pricing it really low, like $19.99. And so the same record may have a different price in different places. If people intentionally follow you on Bandcamp, you might want to give your followers a better price, or maybe you can build a bigger bundle on that way because it's your diehard fans. Whereas in record stores or at a record fair, you might want to convince people to check out the album. So the price can be different. Even at live shows, you usually keep the album's price like rounded to the near 0 or 5 so that people with cash on hand can pay for it. Okay, let's get didactic and let's dive into some specific pricing here. Let's start with pricing for digital. Now, years ago, iTunes kind of came up with the concept of $1 per song. And that has become kind of an anchor for us psychologically moving forward, even though it hasn't adapted for inflation. Although around the time that Apple Music was, or iTunes, I should say, was kind of becoming less popular, and just before Apple Music, they upped the price to $1.27, I believe. But that dollar range is kind of stuck as an anchor. And even when CDs that had like approximately 10 songs on it were sold for $9.99 or $11.99. So that $1 per song or $10 per record has kind of stayed as like our pricing anchor when it comes to digital music. And so if you're putting your album up on Bandcamp, it's okay to kind of think in that range and then discount accordingly. So I might do a 5-song EP for $3 to $5, maybe $4 seems fair. But if it's like a remix EP where our costs weren't that very high, then I might go on the lower side. I might do $2 to $3. And same for a full-length record. I might do $6 to $8. $8 if this is like a super special record, maybe even $10. But I like to discount a little bit because remember, back with iTunes, when it was $1 a song, they would take a 30% cut. So if you sold an album for $9.99, you were only getting $6.66. If you sold a 99-cent song, you were only getting about 60 or 66 cents. So I think like for digital albums, $1 per song. Now, if I'm doing a single, I usually do free because I don't want that barrier. Instead of making like a few bucks here and there, I'd rather more people just get access to that song and use that song as a loss leader for the album. These digital prices I'm talking about are mostly for Bandcamp, but also would apply to if you have a Shopify store or if you have a limited run store or Big Cartel or anywhere that you sell your MP3s or WAV files or FLAC. This doesn't really relate to streaming because we don't get to control that price. Okay, moving on. Pricing for physical. Let's start with cassettes. The standard for cassettes that I've seen is between $5 and $10. Now, I personally think we should be bumping the price of cassettes up. I think in the early days, because they were kind of a novelty thing that people didn't even necessarily listen to them, that people kind of just saw it as like a glorified digital album, like a little bit of a trinket that attached itself to a digital download. I'm hoping that we can kind of boost that a little bit because they still cost a bit to make, they cost to ship, they still have the music on it, and that music cost a lot to make, the same cost to make that music, whether you put it on tape or vinyl or digital. Now, I've seen big indie record labels and major labels selling tapes for $20 and more, and I think that's a little out of hand, but to each their own. I think $10 is a great starting point for a cassette, depending on how beautiful the packaging is and elaborate it is. You could even push that closer to $15. I don't have a problem with that. Maybe 10 to 12. That's just my opinion. And my opinion as not only a record label owner, an independent artist who's done cassettes, but also as a tape collector. You can boost the prices. Okay, let's talk about vinyl. Now, vinyl varies a lot because it depends on how elaborate the packaging is. I mean, you could be really, really cheap with just black vinyl on a super simple sleeve. But if you do really fancy stuff like die cuts or gatefolds or reverse board or splatter or color vinyl or double disc, then all of a sudden the pricing goes up higher. If you have included inserts like posters or download cards or stickers, then the price can go up as well. Also, the scarcity has a lot to do with it, which we'll talk about in a second. I think the lowest I've ever seen people charge for vinyl is like $15, $16.99, $17.99, but that's usually major releases that are doing like 10 or 20,000 copies at a time or even more, and therefore they can charge a lot less. But since the pandemic, I haven't seen prices that low. I think maybe $19.99 is the lowest. I think that's probably a good starting point. Let's start at $20. There are exceptions to that. Sometimes I'll put a record in a store and I want people to discover it and take a chance on it. And so I might price it at like $21.99 or $19.99 and essentially taking a hit or only making like $1 profit after the store takes their profit. Well, that's okay because I really want people to be kind of like pleasantly surprised that this beautiful record that sounds really great is actually also really cheap and it's a local artist. But I think $20 is a good starting point. I'm kind of up towards the 25, 26 or 28 even. I see, records pushing 30 if they have like some of those elaborate features that we talked about earlier. Here's something to keep in mind. Keep in mind the concept of supply and demand, which is one of the basics of microeconomics. If supply is high, and the price is high, then demand will be low. Let me say that again. If the supply is high, meaning there's a lot of copies of this record, and the price is really high, like close to $30, then not a lot of people are going to buy it. Demand is low. On the other hand, if supply is low, meaning you only pressed 100 copies, and the price is low, like a really comfortable $20 price range, then demand will be high. So what you need to do is you need to look at this chart and plot yourself on this chart, knowing that if the price is high and there's a lot of copies, there's no scarcity, people won't be in a rush to buy this because it's a lot of money and there's thousands of copies. But if they feel like there's only 100 copies, they really want one, and the price is pretty good, they're going to jump and quickly make a purchase. So that's just my 2 cents. You got to find that sweet spot somewhere on that graph. I also want to talk about wholesale for a second. Now, if you're selling records directly to your local record store or maybe to a distributor, a national or international distributor, I have people from Japan, some beautiful stores out there that will call me and they'll ask for like 50 copies of a record. And I need to know how to price those records because, like I said, if I'm selling it to the customer for $25, then a store expects to pay at least, well, I would say at least 20% discount, but probably closer to 40, so maybe in the 30% range. So let's say we're selling a CD for $10 to the customer, and it costs me maybe $2 to make. And so I think the record store would expect to maybe pay, I would say $6 for that CD at wholesale, and they're going to sell it to the customer for $10. So they make a $4 profit. You sold it for $6, so you make a $4 profit if it costs you $2 to make. Does that make sense? The best case scenario, if you're new to this, is that the person who's buying the records from you, you could maybe ask them like what they normally pay, what their normal wholesale price is for a record like this, and whether or not they pay for shipping or they pay for half of shipping. So you can ask them and just hope that they don't take advantage of you because you're a newbie. Another thing you can do is ask another artist or another record label in your same genre or in the same part of the country as you and ask them what they charge for wholesale. That's what I did. I had to ask a friend because I wasn't sure and I was actually undercharging. And so for wholesale vinyl, like I've been selling them anywhere between $15 to $18, depending on how deluxe the packaging is. Because if somebody's importing it, they might be charging like close to $30 for it. I just remembered we didn't go over CDs. I apologize. I would say CDs, the pricing for CDs would be like $10. Like I said at the beginning, that's kind of the average. I don't really deal too much in CDs, so I think people expect $10 is okay. If it's a nice like Digipack package, I would maybe sell it for $15. I kind of like, going back to that microeconomic supply and demand thing, I kind of like to think about like, what would I expect to see this record for, whether it's a CD, a cassette, or even a digital album? And sometimes I come across digital albums that are being sold for $20. And I'm like, as a music fan, I don't really value digital, especially in the streaming world. I don't really value a digital download as a product. Now, I don't mind giving money to an artist that I admire. I'll give them $50 for nothing in exchange, but I don't really value a digital file. And so when people charge $20 for a digital file, I feel that's kind of weird. I think like 8 to 10 for an album is the norm. And so you have to kind of think about you as a music consumer, as a music fan, like what do you normally like to spend on for a record? Like what is kind of like an inviting number for you when you're going to the record store to buy vinyl? And so for me, if a record's $24.99, that's a really great price. $25, that's super fair. I have no qualms with that price. And so you kind of need to think of that price in your mind and then work backwards from there and say, okay, I think $25 is the best price for a record. I've only pressed 200 copies and therefore my cost per unit is actually pretty high. So it's $15 per record. So there's only $10 margin in there. So if I'm selling directly to a record store or a wholesaler, I've only got $10 of profit to play with. And remember what we talked about at the very beginning. Are we accounting for the press photography, the graphic designer who designed the cover? Are we accounting for the mastering engineer or even the artist's time to write and record this record? If we are, how much of that $10 margin is getting eaten up? Maybe all of it is. And so maybe if we sell them for $25, then we're selling them at basically a break-even point. But if we give some away for promo, now we're going to obviously be at a loss. Maybe that's okay if we're trying to direct more fans to follow us on social media or to listen to the artist on streaming. These are the questions and the problems that you got to go through in your mind. I hope you found this helpful. I'll keep all the notes of this episode at otherrecordlabels.com/pricing. And remember, when you're dealing with your record label's accounting issues, check out our friends at Infinite Catalog. They're super great Everybody in our community uses them and loves them, and they're friends of mine, and I'm very grateful that they decided to sponsor today's episode. So check out Infinite Catalog by going to infinitecatalog.com. I hope that you found this helpful. Oh, and like I mentioned in the last episode, remember, there are no rules. Just don't be a jerk. Make sure people get paid. Use Infinite Catalog for that. But there's no rules. You can experiment here. If you want to sell a digital album for $20, do it. Try it. See if it works. If you want to sell a really cool vinyl for like $10 or $15 at a huge loss, see if it works. Let me know how it goes. I'm kind of curious. If you've done any type of experimenting with the way you price your records, maybe you give all of your digital downloads away for free on Bandcamp and hope that people will donate or will buy the physical copy or will go to the show. Let me know how that's going for you. I want to know.